Hi, I'm Elaine Guinn, and this is an episode of In Your Neighborhood. And today I am with Charlotte Zietlow, and I'm in the Green Acres area. And I'm interviewing Charlotte today just to share a little bit about her amazing, interesting life. And I hope you enjoy this episode. I'm going to step off camera so that we have a good view.
Okay.
So, for people who aren't familiar with you, can you tell me who you are and how long you've lived in Bloomington? And we were talking a little bit off camera about a book that you're writing, and I would love to hear more about that and about your life.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm Charlotte Zietlow, and my husband Paul and I and our daughter Rebecca moved here in 1964, so a long time ago, to Bloomington because my husband had a job with the university. He was teaching English literature, particularly Victorian poetry, but he loved to teach anything, and he loved literature. He loved literature. And when we're originally from Minnesota, and went to graduate school in Michigan, at the University of Michigan. And I was thinking, well, we're going to, Paul will get a job, and then we'll go someplace that's not in the Midwest where I've always lived.
Yeah.
I think that will be exciting. And we didn't. We came to southern Indiana, which was really deep into the Midwest. I was in graduate school, too, at the time. I was working on a doctor's degree in linguistics, particularly German linguistics, but it was generally linguistics as well. And so we moved down here with our daughter, and we had a son who was born several months later, and lived first out on Sunny Slopes. It was the first house we ever lived in that was the first place we ever lived that was meant to be lived in. We lived in a basement, an attic, and a garage before that. So
the things people do to make it through
yeah,
college.
It was lots of fun.
Yeah.
But it was exciting to have a real house. And then we bought a house in Green Acres here in town. And eventually I taught at the university briefly, graduate courses, but there's the whole story there. In any case, I was a faculty wife and was simply not considered seriously for a position for which I was eminently qualified. In fact, I applied for the job, and we got an answer to my very serious letter with transcripts and everything in a memo to my husband on green paper in his box at the university. So things that did not augur well for my future as an academic. And I finished my dissertation, and I got my degree, and then the family moved to Bratislava in Czechoslovakia, where we lived for a year, all four of us. I had gotten involved in politics in 1960 in the Kennedy campaign, just as a precinct worker, knocking on doors, persuading people to vote for Kennedy, even though he was Catholic. And because I'm a Lutheran minister's daughter, I would say, I'm a Lutheran minister's daughter. If I can do it, you can do it, and change votes. And I really changed votes with that rather weak argument. But I realized that it's important because Kennedy carried Michigan by less than a vote per precinct.
Wow.
And that was I carried about 1% of the vote, which is a lot.
Yeah.
So I've always been involved at a low level. We lived here in Green Acres, and a lot of things happened in the 60s, and I'm writing about that. But the book I'm working on is about the election in 1971. And I had gotten back from Bratislava, where we lived in a totalitarian world, where there was no rule of law. It was a rule of whatever the people in charge decided would happen today, which is frightening, and something that Americans should understand is really not a good thing. Rule of law is really important. Having rules that you can count on that determine how people are treated, both in their home situation, in their community, really, really important. So that I
It's
have
astonishing
special.
to think about.
Pardon me?
It's just astonishing to think about.
Yes,
You
it
know.
is, and it is.
Mhm.
We lived in Bratislava, which is on. I'll just show it anyway. On the Danube, it's 40 miles east of Vienna,
Mhm.
where Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Austria come together, and we were the only Americans in this city of 500,000 who, and we were the only the Americans there. We could go in and out of the border
Mhm.
anytime we wanted to, but we were the only people we knew who could.
Wow.
And there were purges going on, and people were gradually being demoted and so forth. So I came back to the United States with a full appreciation, well, of the United States, even though the 60s were a huge turmoil, and there was a lot of people were protesting, and there was a really strong tensions about the Vietnam War and about the civil rights movement, and the women's movement, and the Democratic and Republican parties were really in turmoil themselves. It was not a pleasant time in the United States. It was very difficult. Came back, and the Democrats in this town had reorganized for complicated reasons, but they'd done it effectively, and I found that I could be in charge of a precinct, basically, working with Mark Haggerty, actually, who's an interesting person. And he actually promised to kind of keep out of my way if I'd organized. But we carried this precinct, which was huge, for Vance Harkey, who'd been an opponent of the war.
Mhm.
And we got 1,000 votes for him. He needed them. He won by 4,000 votes that year. Interesting, strange guy. And the county chair came to me and said, Charlotte, why don't you think of running for city council? You know how to organize, and that would be great. We need a woman on the council. I said, I don't know anything about that. You know, how could I do that? Which is a typical thing for a woman to say, by the way.
Yes.
He said, oh, you could go to a city council meeting. I went to a city council meeting, and these gentlemen, you know, the fathers of the community and so forth, marched in they just marched in from having laid their coats on the mayor's couch because there was no place for the council to hang their coats, and sat down and had ordinances read by title only, and there were people in the audience. There were some big issues going on at the time, and they were people in the audience wanting to talk, and there was no time for them to talk, and they weren't allowed to talk. And the people made their decisions, but we weren't even sure what they were, and walked out. And I thought, gee, I could do better than that. So I decided to run. And I will say, there was a liberal friend of mine, or a liberal person in town. We were at a cocktail party, and he said, so Charlotte, I hear that you're thinking of running for city council. And I said, yeah, I am. I said, I'm trying to figure it out. And he said, that's all we need on the city council is a mere housewife.
Wow.
And I said, yes. I said, that is exactly what you need on the city council. I said, you need somebody who knows what the streets are like, because I drive up and down the streets every day taking my children to the park and going shopping, and I know what the streets are like, and I know what the parks are like, and I know what the water pressure is like, because those are things that the city has something to do with, and I'm paying attention to it every day. And yes, I believe I will run for city council, and I did. So we had there were 9 of us, really, who all came to the election with many different ideas, but we were all novices. None of us had been in power in elective office before. Many of us were I think all of us were transplants to Bloomington. We were immigrants. But we cared about it. We came from different places. We had expectations from our community that were not being fulfilled by the community, and we could see ways in which it could be improved tremendously. And one way would be for people to have more say, and the people we felt that the people in power should be listening and engaging with the people. So it was a two-way street. So that actually was the theme of our campaign. And we worked very hard together. We were very coordinated. We were all over town, in every nook and cranny. We didn't get discouraged when we ran into nests of Republicans. We just talked to them and let them know what we were thinking, asking them what they were thinking, and building a campaign. Mm-hmm. And the fact is that we won. We won. It was a big surprise. Mm-hmm. We won, and we immediately got to work and ticked off the things that we said we needed to work on. I personally worked on support services because there were a number of ad hoc positions open, and I was really interested in the social services, and nobody else wanted to do it. So I got on the Community Action Program Board, which was very vibrant. It was just, just not too long into the Great Society, and the Community Action Program was very vibrant. So I was on their board and the Community Mental Health Center board, and the 4 Cs, which was community coordinated child care, and different things like that. I just took those positions. So I learned a lot about those positions. Meanwhile, everybody else went to parks or to animal shelters or whatever. And we had one member of our council, Brian DeSinqua, who had been an organizer for a community action program in Boston. He was also, an immigrant, very bright and very, very smart, and very savvy. And he created a manpower task force. So we began to talk about what the opportunities were for people here, especially women and people with low income, because it was clear to me and to him. But we wanted data. We wanted data. Mm-hmm. And so we went out and got a whole bunch of data about the labor force, what it was consisted of, what kind of jobs there were, how much they paid, and so forth. Totally new to city government. Mm-hmm. Never thought of it. But we also did a human rights ordinance and environmental commission, created an environmental commission, and historic preservation became part of what we were doing. Mm-hmm. Our intention was to professionalize and depoliticize city government. Mm-hmm. So no more patronage, no more you're on. We recognized the mayor needed to hire people that he felt confident, mm-hmm. but line people should be kept on, whether they're Republicans or not, as long as they're doing the job. Mm-hmm. So we changed a lot of different things. It was list one thing after another, the way we did business, mm-hmm. and the intention of business, and we asked for advice. Yeah, we don't know everything. People came forward with really good ideas. We sat down and we worked them out. And we just changed things. So that was a very important moment in the history of Bloomington. And we didn't have time then to think about writing it down or even taking photographs. Mm-hmm. You see pictures of photographs of things. Never thought of that. Never thought of that. We were just too busy doing stuff.
Yeah, too busy doing things. Yeah,
doing things. The farmers market. So many things we really are. They characterize the community now. The farmers mm-hmm. market, that came out of that time.
Wow.
We developed a child care voucher program. Mm-hmm. That came out of that time.
You mentioned commissions.
Bloomington Transit came out of that time. We just said, what do we need? How are we going to get it? Mm-hmm. Who do we need to help us? Mm-hmm. Who was interested in helping us? Because we didn't always know. We'd say, you all come, kind of. Mm-hmm. And it was a very important time, I think, for the city of Bloomington. Mm-hmm. And it's time now to reflect on what that was and whether or not we've deviated, and whether or not the deviations are good. Mm. Maybe we need to get back to. We were so successful that we're all Democrats on the council now, and the same ones year in and year out. And we need loyal opposition too. I think it's only healthier. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But that's the reason for writing that book. I think mm-hmm. is to reflect and then consider where we're going with that.
Yeah, and sharing a piece of the history, I think,
And
is
sharing
important.
a piece of the history, because the history is important.
Mhm.
I think we need to know where we've been in order to understand. Annexation was particularly, I say this now, but the annexation was a big issue, and it had been totally unsuccessful for year in and year out.
Mhm.
And we said, okay, you just don't do things in big chunks. You do it one by one.
Mhm. Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and that's what we did.
Mhm.
One by one, negotiating parcels, sitting down with people, finding out what they need and what we needed, and just hard work, and also and inclusionary.
Mhm.
I just believe in that kind of leadership or whatever it is, but certainly management leadership. But you've got to have everybody working together, and I'm just not a top-down person myself.
Yeah, and that's what really stood out to me before we started recording, which is a point that I thought was important to note on, is that you, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, no one can see me on the
Yeah.
camera, a housewife can make a difference.
Yes.
And that anyone, and that's something, one of my favorite quotes is, I must do something is much better than saying something must be done.
Yes.
And I have that same fire, you know, that
Yes.
I'm going to do something.
Yeah.
And I think, you pointed that out, that this illustrates that, all of these people focusing on these issues and ticking things off, ticking off all of those different problems that you guys were challenged with. You can do something if you're working together.
You can.
And I think the idea in most communities from the average person is that someone else is in charge, or someone else will worry about that, or someone else will fix it, or even there's nothing I can do.
There's a lot of there's nothing I can do.
Yeah, instead of there is something you can do.
Yes.
You do have a voice, but the thing is, you have to get out there and do it.
Yep.
And I think that's that's the big difference, and what's so amazing about your story is you got out there and did it. You and many others,
lots of other people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But to be involved in that.
I think thank you for really that's the thesis. I have been involved in other levels of government. I ran for Congress. That didn't work, but I did run. I ran very, very hard, and I didn't. And a friend of mine and I were having lunch one day, and she was a state legislator, and I was president of city council. I was president of city council the first 2 years of that council, and I asked her, well, how do you like the working on the legislature? She said, I really love it, except I'm sick and tired of those guys telling me that I can't understand a budget because I've never met a payroll. And she was on the Ways and Means Committee, so money, and ultimately became the expert on the school funding formula. But and of course, they had never met a payroll, many of them. So I said, that's actually happened to me too on the council. It's sort of like, you can't possibly understand this. Just because there are 3 zeros or 6 zeros behind a number doesn't change the fact that you can understand. If you run a household, you know what a budget is. You know that you have too much money or not enough, or enough and not enough. I should say, never too much, of course. But in any case, I understood the budget very well, and so we said, okay, well, you know what? We will meet a payroll. And that was May of 1973, and we talked for a while because we had a very good lunch, and I had prepared it, and Marilyn was a good cook also, and we decided to start a restaurant, and then we decided not to because we had another glass of wine and it sobered us. And that we would instead start a kitchen goods store, and we did, and it's still there.
Oh, nice.
And that's so satisfying.
Yeah.
And we did it downtown because we thought downtown needs locally owned stores that are run by people who care about customers and know their product and are really focused on marketing the downtown. And we were right about that.
And you also mentioned, we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, as we were drinking some tea and just chatting, but you mentioned that there are some scholarships that came out of the
Yes.
Good for Cooks
Yeah.
store.
Yeah.
And
So we're now on the fifth owner, and I think they're doing really well. But it seemed to me if we could help young people, especially women, get through culinary training at Ivy Tech, and now they've really raised the level and quality of the training out there, of the education out there, and that it needs support. And so got people together and said, let's all pitch in and pay for scholarships. And so we've got 2 now. I'm very excited.
And that's wonderful. I mean, and I think that's so Bloomington, and that's also why I wanted to begin this vlog that I'm putting together, is to share some of the amazing people here and some of the amazing stories like what you shared. And how we do try to focus on local business and supporting each other and helping each other, and that's really unique. It's not. I'm originally from Indianapolis, and the likelihood that you would even run into somebody that in a grocery store is slim to none. Let alone someone actually care about you. And I know Indianapolis is a lot bigger than Bloomington, but Bloomington's growing, and there's still this sense of supporting each other, and we have a high percentage of businesses that are launched here that are successful because of that, for that reason. That we're in many ways trying to support the local economy as opposed to going the big box route. And like having scholarships through a local business, I think that's just a perfect example of Bloomington and what life in Bloomington is like. And who Bloomtonians are.
Well, that's nice. And I think that election set the tone.
Yeah.
It really did. I have 2 mantras. One is nothing doesn't count. Think about that. I mean, everything counts, but it's really that nothing doesn't count is an important way to think about it. Whatever one does in life is going to affect what happens later.
It does, yeah.
And you can use it, or you can forget it, or you can deny it, or you can say, this happened, it wasn't what I had hoped should happen, I'm not going to do that again. And so it matters that it happened because it told you what you don't want to do. So I think it's important. We should go through life, I think mindfully is a word that's used a lot, but understanding that what we do today or what we don't do today. And I think the sins of omission are bigger than the ones of commission.
That's so true. It's what we don't do
It's
today.
what we don't do. And the other one is you never know. So I found out that you cannot, you may think you can't stand somebody and don't agree with somebody, but you never know what's going to happen.
Right.
A lot of the things that I ended up doing, especially when I became a county commissioner, but along the way, was this person who I thought, gosh, we'll never agree on anything. And I agreed on this or that. And that brought us to this and that. And you never know, so it's really important
to have an open mind.
Yes, and not to burn bridges, and to have an open mind. Yes, it's really important because some of the best things happen by surprise. I had when I became a county commissioner in 1980. Most unlikely, it was a Reagan landslide. Why I won, I don't know exactly, but I won by a couple hundred votes. But I had 9,000 more votes than Jimmy Carter. Why? Anyway, and then I became the president I was president commissioner for really 7 out of the 8 years I was there. And we saved the courthouse and built the justice building and changed the airport and created a veteran service office and many, many really good things. And I did it with allies that I would never have expected I would work well with, and we worked really well together.
I've had some similar experiences. When I was running New Hope Family Shelter, I had some similar experiences where there were people, the most unlikely allies were sometimes the best allies. And speaking of the Justice Building, so I had known you for several years, and I, was fairly new. I've been in Bloomington for almost 10 years now, and so fairly new to the area. And of course, I took over as the executive director at New Hope. And I just always viewed you as my friend Charlotte, this nice person, who, when I was sitting in a meeting, I remember it was something having to do with maybe safe and civil something, and they were discussing something, and I think it was obvious that I wasn't really aware of what they were talking about, and you just kind of leaned over, and I've had so many mentors, and I've considered you to be one of those, and you kind of gave me some guidance, like what was going on, and I really appreciated that and needed that. So later I'm walking, on the square, had never even noticed, and then I noticed your name is on this building.
Isn't that amazing?
And now I know the connection, because I have wanted to research or ask, or I didn't know that you were involved in getting that building there, and hence the reason your name is on a building in downtown.
Yeah, I'm
Bloomington.
not sure why it's there, but I have been.
You're like, I'm not sure either.
Yeah, but that building is there partly because I worked really hard.
Yeah.
And I also have really been interested in community corrections and the whole issue of corrections, because we have such a flawed system of incarceration and lack of training for people who get involved with the law, and the whole idea of the recidivism seems to me just dumb. We should spend some money on helping people not go back to jail, and we'd save a lot of money. It would just be a conservative thing to do. I don't. So I've been involved. I've gone to. I was a trustee for 16 years at Indiana State. Don't ask. Yeah, and one of the things that they were hoping to do was they had faculty going down to Wabash Valley Correctional Facility, and it was, I thought that was wonderful. These English teachers, so because they spoke to the inmates, they call them offenders, which is offensive, but whatever. And they turned people on to literature, and eventually I helped them as a trustee in working with the state to get a baccalaureate program there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we actually we could grant baccalaureate bachelor's degrees to people who were in the facility. Unfortunately, the state chose to discontinue the funding for that a few years ago, which was a great disappointment to me. And I feel just really wrong-headed. I mean, we should be helping people be good instead of smacking them. But
well, and this made me think. Talking about the recidivism rate and incarceration, and we were talking on before I turned the camera on about my dad, a bit of my personal story, and part of what's in the book that I'm writing, Being Chased by a Bear, which is about hypervigilance in the human brain and the connection to early childhood trauma. But my dad was homeless for 22 years, and he really didn't go to jail. When I say that much, you would think that someone who was homeless 22 years, that he probably went to jail every year or so, but he really just had stints. And what would happen is he would have an offense. I'll give an example. He didn't leave a bar one night. He had nowhere to go, and he became belligerent, and the police were called, and they put him in jail. Well, he had a place to sleep. He knew that he did this. So then he's given a court date. He's released the next day. He doesn't show up for the court date. A warrant is issued. A year later, he's driving and has bad license plate or no seatbelt or something like that.
The warrant pops up.
Yeah, and then he gets pulled over, and then he goes to jail until court, well, because he skipped out on the initial, they hold him, or they sentence him immediately to 1 year in jail or whatever for this minor offense. So there were matters like that, and I think the issue that you were bringing up, which I absolutely agree with, is that that this is a setup, and it costs a lot of money.
It costs a lot of money. I don't even, if people don't care about the people. They do care about the money.
I know. And so the
it's-
money that is spent on jail, I kind of came up with a rough figure on the very minimal amount that my dad did spend in jail. There was the Department of Corrections came and spoke during the charrette, which was in
Yes.
2013, I think. And they shared that it was 700, and this was in Indianapolis, and I know we're not, that's where my dad was from, so I was like grateful for that data. But it was $700 approximately to process an arrest, and it was approximately $67 a night to house someone in jail, to shelter them in jail. So I took the number of days approximate that my dad had spent in jail, and the approximate number of arrests. I had a list because they're online, and the figure that I came up with was $156,000. And that's only an arrest. That doesn't include the amount of time he spent in hospitals, not having somewhere to sleep, or the time he had bronchitis so bad because he
was outside.
Yeah, and he had no housing, and then he was hospitalized for bronchitis. He was hospitalized for a finger infection. I mean, things that should be really minor. So that doesn't even include that cost. And so the thing that always got me when I was shocked when I realized, like, wow, that's a lot of money. We could have paid for treatment at the Oasis in California or whatever, the high dollar.
Yeah.
We could have bought him a home. And we could have bought him several homes, small homes. It's just shocking to me that the answer is still jail.
Yeah, I just
because housing, getting people housing and getting them stable and getting them secure and that is what ends it. And I'm with you on that. That there are some crimes that do merit arresting.
Oh, yes.
But then there are these minor things like this,
Well, the reality is, I don't know what the exact figures are today. We do have the percentage. I was on a community correction task force in the 70s. In the 80s, I was a county commissioner, and we created the community corrections program in the county. So I was involved in that. And then in the 90s, I was on another task force, and then I was on another one. And then I've just, I worked at Middleway House. I was working with people who were one way or another involved with the law. And so I've continued, and then I was involved in New Leaf, New Life as it started and emerged and changed, and still am on their board, although I haven't been as active as I should be. But I'm interested. I've constantly been following what's going on in the jail.
Oops.
Just let that go.
Maybe I'll pause for a moment.